Ethics Part 3, Goodness and Equality. One of the classic moral questions is why be good? Interesting enough, this seems to rest on the assumption that evil is more appealing than good. After all, the question is not why be evil, but why be good? So it seems to assume that you have to give people a reason to be good, that naturally they default, if not to evil, at least to being neutral. Not surprisingly, a critical part of answering this question involves determining what it is to be good. Because if you're asking people why be good, the obvious question is what does this goodness mean? And then from there you can go to why they should be that, or not be that. Most moral theorists do attempt to answer this question. For example, the classic virtue theorists, such as Confucius and Aristotle, contend that being virtuous makes you happy. So a very good reason to be good is in order to be happy. And of course, Confucius and Aristotle both accepted that happiness is a good. Especially Aristotle. He argued that it is in fact the supreme good. In the case of Thomas Hobbes, you have a very good reason to be good, at least as he determines it, in regards to being just. That's to say, keeping to your covenants. For Hobbes, of course, keeping to your covenants is what it is to be just, to break them unjust. And the motive to be good in this sense, or to be just, is that once the sovereign is put into place, being good or just enables one to, in general, avoid punishment. In the case of ethical egoism in general, what is right, what is good, is what is in a person's self-interest. And so in general, people have a very good reason to be good because doing so is what is in their own self-interest. In the case of Immanuel Kant, he contended that being evil is being irrational, which presumably gives you some reason to be good. Now when it comes to other people, almost all people don't want others to do bad things to them, and they generally want others to do good for them. So, people generally attempt, out of their own self-interest, to encourage others to be good, at least to them, or at the very least, to not be bad to them. While self-interest gives a person a reason to want others to be good, the question still remains, why should I be good? Now one very practical answer is, of course, behavior that is regarded as immoral is often punished in some manner. And behavior that's regarded as moral is sometimes rewarded in some way. And of course most people prefer to be rewarded rather than being punished. And so one very practical reason to be good, or at least appear good, is to avoid being punished and to receive rewards. Now, of course, this leads to a reformulation of the question. Instead of just why be good, the question is why be good if you can avoid punishment? And why be good if you can get the rewards of goodness without actually being good? Put it another way, more concisely, the question is why should a person choose goodness for its own sake? Now people often attempt another practical answer, namely that although people can sometimes avoid punishment for their misdeeds, and there are often no rewards for being good, if people do wrong when they can avoid punishment, or think they can, then it's likely that society will be harmed in some manner. This harm, so the argument goes, might well affect the person who did the wrong. Thus, the reason to be good is to avoid an indirect rather than direct harm. So even if the person is not caught and punished themselves, their actions will result in harm to them. Of course, the obvious reply to this, if a person can avoid, or at the very least thinks that he or she can avoid these harms, then there would be little reason to be good. Now, not surprisingly, people often advance a religious answer to this question. Many religions answer this question of why be good by placing a divine entity, such as God, or a force, such as karma, as the enforcer of morality. So misdeeds are ultimately punished, and good deeds ultimately rewarded by this enforcer. And these punishments cannot be avoided, and these rewards are supposedly guaranteed. However, this still makes the motivation to be good merely a matter of the desire to avoid punishment, to, for example, stay out of hell, and the hope of some reward. For example, to go to heaven or receive the benefits of good karma. There is, of course, also the question of whether or not such an enforcer, God, karma, or whatever divine or supernatural force one might put forth. Now, because of this, thinkers have often argued that people should choose goodness for its own sake, and not because they fear external punishment or the hope of an external reward. A standard approach to this is to argue that goodness has intrinsic benefits, such that merely being good results, as they say, in its own reward, and that evil has its own intrinsic harms, that is to say, that being bad comes with its own punishment. These benefits and harms provide a motivation to do good, and to not be evil, that does not depend on outside forces. A person accrues these benefits or suffers the harms merely by being good or by being evil. Now, an interesting question is, so why the concern about motivating people to choose goodness for its own sake? Now, one very practical and somewhat cynical explanation would be that people push this so that people will be good even when they think they can get away with being bad. Now, less cynically, or perhaps more cynically, I'll present two analogies that sort of illustrate, by this analogy, why people might have this motivation. Consider first the case of God. God is supposed to be loved or worshipped not for the sake of the benefits or for the fear of punishment, but simply because God is supposed to be inherently worthy or deserving of such love or worship. For example, imagine someone goes up to, a priest or a rabbi, etc., religious leader, and says, I got this thing all sorted out. He's like a big godfather in the sky. And if I do what he says, he'll, make me one of his gang, and I'll get a reward. I'll be able to go to heaven, and so, I'll follow what he says out of this fear, this missing out on this reward. But of course, if I cross God like a godfather, he'll put a hit out on me, except it'll be an eternal hit. I'll die, and I'll be in hell forever. So, because he's going to pay me off real well, or punish me real bad for, not believing in him, I'll believe in God. Now, there are of course people who do make that argument, but in general, people who are, religious would probably find that whole notion put so bluntly, so crudely, to be offensive, because God is supposed to be worthy of our love, not merely a big thug in the sky that kicks people's asses in order to get them to be good and to avoid being bad. The second analogy, love. In our heart of hearts, we want to be loved not in terms of how good we look in a bathing suit, or how nice our car is, or how much money we have, or how big our house is. Because someone will always look better in the bathing suit. Someone will always have a bigger house. Someone will always have more stuff. And of course, even if one is at the top of the game, the most stuff, the best abs, etc., time is very cruel. And eventually a person won't have that. So, we typically want to be loved for who we truly are, the person that we are, not our stuff, our appearance, our money, how good we look, naked, etc., but for its own sake. So similarly, just as people think we should, love God and respect God because God is worthy of this, and in our own cases, we generally believe that we should be loved simply because we are worthy of love, philosophers and thinkers often believe that we should be good simply because goodness is worthy of this, and evil is worthy of disdain.